you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, particularly with Kevin. I think we should, depending on what he says, we'll make a judgment after this interview, but going into it, we'll give you a great round of applause for everything you've accomplished with Lionsgate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, let's get right to it. Kevin, this is the 35th anniversary of this festival. What an accomplishment to build it into what they have built. But looking ahead, where are we headed in this brave new digital world? Say 5 years, 25 years, 50 years from now. Let's talk about it. 5 years from now, where will your business, our business be?
Well, where it's going, as is the way in a lot of other facets of our life and entertainment and technology, is more personalization and customization. So I see a future not that far off in which digital offerings from a variety of brands that we know, whether it's ESPN or Global or anything else, are going to be available on your iPad with an app at a touch of a button. You'll start paying for these one at a time. That cable bill of old of $150 a month will maybe become a little less or maybe get broken up a bit, and you'll start paying more because in increments of $6 and $8 and $9, it feels less. But when you add up the 20 services that you have, you'll be paying more. But it will be a major shift of wealth and income and revenue from the big verticals that we know today into the niche players that get the services out there first, obviously Netflix being the most recent entry into the market, and it's already dominating. So it will be easy to get whatever you want. You won't watch much live unless it's sports or competition reality or an award show. But beyond that, the things that you really care about, your reality and scripted shows, you'll watch on your own time, wherever you happen to be, on a phone, on an iPad, and you'll pay for the things you really care about, and the things you don't care so much about, you won't pay for.
Well, given that as a sort of a baseline, what does this foretell for content? What's going to happen to content? If you're right about the future, no reason to doubt it, then where does that leave us with content? Where is content moving?
Well, content remains and will be king because the best content will win regardless of the platform. And the traditional models that kind of had a bottleneck on how and where you could access content through a doorway that was controlled by one or more entities, those will fall apart a little bit, and you'll find the best things you need. It'll be very easy. They'll find you because they'll know the things that you've liked before, and they'll send you an invitation to watch Game of Thrones online since you liked last season or another show like it. And you'll be awash in content. The biggest challenge will be, which I think it is already for all of us, is how do you find the time to actually watch it all? And it will creep into your life in a way that is even more pervasive than today.
But do you foresee additional platforms? We're already in the new multi-platform world, but do you see this increasing, decreasing, or staying about the same?
Increasing. There will be more. There will be more. They will appeal to particular constituents. There will be broad-based things like a Netflix or a Hulu, and there will be very niche things that just have an affinity group that wants that. It's very similar to the cable dynamic in which you have big, broad channels and niche channels. And the question will be who can survive that shakeout, and the content has to be great. Even in today's market, emerging channels are relevant if they have a hit. And when they don't, the MPVDs start to say, that channel, I don't really need that channel. And I don't want to pass that cost on to my consumers. So I think it'll be very similar. So branding is hugely important to get through the clutter. But at the end of the day, it will be the shows. And if you love something and you have to have it, you'll pay. People will pay. It will be a subscription pay universe. It's already headed there, and it will just get more and more.
Well, taking off from that point, what about so-called binge viewing? Do you think it increases, decreases?
Increases. I think it goes back to the personalization and customization. It becomes, when I have the time, I can get a bunch of viewing in. When I'm on a treadmill or on a recumbent bike, or I'm on a 9-hour trip to Europe. I could watch an entire season of something and be done. I've ran into a bunch of people over the last couple of days who have told me how many episodes they are in to Orange is the New Black, which is our show that was available on Thursday at midnight. And people are sending, I'm in episode 6, 7, don't tell me the 8. And, many people have watched it before this conference is even over. And then they have to wait for a year. It's painful.
Well, I'm thinking about, and this may be a bit off point, but as you were talking, in the book business, in the book publishing business, which is having its own challenges in the new digital world, increasingly, everyone in the book business is looking for the one big blockbuster breakthrough. This has made it more difficult for books, let's say, that are riskier, and fewer books are being published because everybody's looking for the big blockbuster, pay big advances. Now, looking forward to our digital, visual, and oral world, what are the chances that this happens? Which is to say, everybody puts money forward looking for the one big blockbuster hit, and it makes it very difficult, even more difficult than it is today, for the mom and pop operator, so-called, or the independent operator to crack through.
Well, you're absolutely right about that dynamic playing out in the movie business, the franchise film business, which we're part of with things like The Hunger Games and Twilight and Divergent. Everybody's looking for big, blockbusters, all the comic book adaptations, and the niche movies that many people grew up on that were Academy competitors seem to fall by the wayside. Television is a little different. The economics are quite different. It's not expensive to make a lot of television. If you think about reality budgets, which range anywhere from $200,000 to $600,000 for kinds of shows that become breakout successes, and those are a lot of mom and pop producers putting these huge hits on, from cooking shows to docuseries and everything in between. That's the easiest, that's the lowest barrier to entry in the TV business. When you get into the scripted world, your deficit financing and shows range anywhere from $1 million to 3 or 4, in the case of Game of Thrones, multiple millions per episode. That's a little harder. You have to have distribution. You have to have a big tolerance for debt or risk. But the audiences are loyal, and they'll show up, and they will monetize. So if that show is a hit, it will be preserved and stay on, and there's a model to justify it. You have to be quite nimble and be able to do shows at all ends of the spectrum. And some are the super high-end ones, and HBO and Netflix can pay that kind of money. And others, we have a new show on Hulu that we do for close to $500,000 an episode called Deadbeat, and it's become a big success for Hulu, and it will also, for their model, work quite nicely. So diversity is key. If you do fall into just one niche and that's all you're doing, then you may be in trouble down the line. But I think TV, more than anything, it's a more democratic medium, and there's a lot of people that will watch TV before they go spend $10 to $15 on a movie. And for now, I think it's safe to say it will be fine in a diverse pool of offerings.
In a diverse pool of offerings. Now, in that diverse pool of offerings, where does, in particular looking toward the future, where does on-demand streaming fit into the picture?
It's everything. I think it's where everything is going to go, with the exception, as I mentioned earlier, of things that have to be watched in the moment right then. The Super Bowl, sporting events, football, soccer, World Cup. That's why sports rights in the television business are astronomically increasing and becoming so important, and regionally in big markets where there are big franchises, whether it's the New York Knicks or the LA Lakers, whatever they might be, the Dodgers in our case, people pay billions to hold on to those and then kind of leverage other cable outlets to buy them at a price so they can preserve that viewing. But everything else is consumable kind of when you want it, as you need it, and those things will be watched on a streaming basis, on a cloud basis, or just stacked up on your iPad ready for you.
As you're speaking here, Kevin, it occurs to me, I want to get back again to the kind of people who are attending this festival. Mm-hmm. It's a broad range, as you know.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the bottom, moving up. Absorbing what you've talked about so far, we're about maybe 10, 15 minutes in. If you're, I hate to use the phrase mom and pop, but if you're a very small company, and you're trying, first of all, to survive,
Right.
hoping and praying to thrive. Given what you've said, what should they leave this festival thinking to themselves in order to give themselves the best chance to survive and the best chance to thrive?
Well, I've been coming here a long time, not quite 35 years, but now 15, I think, and I've been pitched by everyone. When I first came, I was the mom and pop guy pitching and hoping that a network would take a meeting or a coffee. And, you know, the ultimate thing is all passion for a great idea. Passion will deliver hits in the end. It will deliver a development deal. You have to believe in something. You can't do 50 things at the same time. You've got to pick your spots and tell a great story. And, you know, things like Banff and other markets around are interesting access points. It's probably not where you're going to sell something, but it is a chance to listen and just absorb from all the various people who are in various stages of the journey themselves, whether from the mom and pop in the middle running something or you know, retiring and saying, this is what I've done for 40 years in my television business career. Access is important, but the educational side of a place like this is really key. And I think you go to these things, you listen to everybody, you look at these companies that have succeeded, watch the product, and see if those are stories that you want to tell. And if they are, you don't stop until you find a way to tell them in whatever platform you can get onto. And I say this to anybody that I talk to, a lot of students coming out of school who are saying, okay, I'm going to get a job as a director. You know, tomorrow in a couple of years, I'm Steven Spielberg. I say, that's like a 1 in a million story. You actually take the first job that's offered and just say yes. And hang around, whatever it might be, and just absorb. And if you're really good, someone will pluck you out of that thing and say, you're better over here. But if you never got your foot in the door, nothing would have ever happened. So you can't be too choosy on where you get the first couple of things off the ground. Certainly Lionsgate wasn't when we started. We were making shows for anybody that would take our calls. I think I'm going to be reminded of that this week by a few people in the room. But that, you know, but then one leads to another, and away you go. So it's the same thing for a producer.
There was a line in the paper, I think it was yesterday, that comes to mind. Someone had given someone in the acting profession the advice, your first job is to get the job.
That's right.
It's a version of what you were just saying. Say yes.
Absolutely. It's never glamorous. It's never glamorous. The first job I had in entertainment was I was hired as a cost control assistant. This was in the accounting department. I can't do any math. It was terribly misguided on their part. But as it turned out, it really wasn't a math job. It was just a place to put me until they could find somewhere else for me to do. And I spent, you know, several months convincing all the people in this company that they should use the post office priority mail instead of FedEx, because FedEx was so expensive. And in so doing, it was a production company prepping a show that was going on to ABC. And because I had to go to every single person in the organization, I learned what everybody did. From the president of the company to the prop guy who was working on props and complaining that, you know, the union wages weren't up to par, and everything in between. And I got them all excited about priority mail, and I parlayed that into a job on the set as a production assistant when the show went into production. But you got to start somewhere, and I'll never forget it, and I still use priority mail sometimes.
Well, now moving up our income level for those who are here, who are in, let's say, the middle,
right?
Established independent producers, they've survived.
Yeah.
And they're thriving to a certain degree.
Right.
But they're looking to do what you have done, that is to take a stable business and build it.
Right.
What counsel can you give them?
Well, I think some of the things still apply, which is, you know, the great stories and the things you're passionate about win out. You know, I know we've been in the Canadian market a long time. The company was founded here. Canada has a unique subsidy system to keep great artists and producers working in a market that is overshadowed at sometimes by the competitive nature of the U.S. And you know, it's kind of a two-edged sword. It's both a blessing and a curse in certain ways, because there's a a kind of a continuation and a sustenance of a certain amount of activity that is what I call development. It keeps everybody going, but it doesn't always necessarily result in huge hits either. And it's a hit-driven business. So I think it's key in this market, and I think in any market, that you have to create a diverse portfolio of the work. There's the work that keeps the lights on and keeps the company, however small or middle size or even big that it is, and the search for the great thing that's going to truly put you on the map. It might take years. It might take multiple networks. We're known at Lionsgate for never giving up. No man left behind. We're like the Marines of television, and we will not take a pass. My colleague Sandra Stern is here, our COO of the TV group, and we have a friendly debate at all times about some of these projects that are still on the books, and she uses the analogy that you got to do spring cleaning, you get rid of your old stuff, you get it out the door, and I said, there's just one more pitch. I'm going to get this thing into HBO. They said no 5 times, but in any case, sometimes it works out, and many of our hits have started elsewhere, developed, didn't go forward, and then become successes. So it's true, you probably have to temper that with some caution and some prudence and say, okay, it's time, this is never going to grow. But if you really love something, and it's a story you have to tell, and so many innovators in our business, the luminaries in our business, Tyler Perry, who has done 20 movies with Lionsgate and many TV series, who was living in his car, emulating Oprah and saying, I could do this, is now a huge media mogul and titan. He believed in his story, and he was going to get it out there. And there's a lot like that. And that tenacity, more than anything, really wins the day. If you hang around the basket long enough, you may score.
Tenacity, and give me one other essential ingredient for success. Tenacity, you've underscored that, italicized it.
Well, I think ultimately it's tenacity and kind of strategic thinking. I'll quote Sandra again, but she's a chess player, and it's thinking 3 moves ahead and not, keeping your powder dry, not rushing in, telling everybody the whole pitch in, like 35 seconds, and overwhelming. You've got to pick your moments. There's going to be a time when you can pitch and get somebody alone. There's a time to do a targeted email Saturday morning at 2 a.m. to convince somebody to read that script when you think they might be wavering. You have to think in our business truly like a politician. And I think of any show very similar to taking legislation through Congress. It takes forever.
So watch House of Cards.
House of Cards is a great analogy for our business. There's a lot of people, there's some duplicity, there's a fair amount of bad behavior, and ultimately you can get somewhere, but it really is that long of a process. And if you think it's going to happen overnight, it almost never does. Now and then something happens. In the YouTube generation, that can happen. But more often than not, it's the blocking and tackling and doing all the kind of less glamorous work that will lead to a moment in which you can have a triumph, a creative triumph.
Right. Now let's move to the top tier. For people who are your competitors and with their own company, people who are operating at the top, across all platforms, everything they touch seems turned to, if not platinum, at least gold.
Right.
Question, do we have at least one more big consolidation move in the business?
Absolutely.
A la the AOL and
it's happening.
ComSat deal?
It's all happening right now. It's happened in the Canadian market. It's happening in the U.S. market. The Time Warner Comcast proposed merger is a huge seismic shift in the business. The AT&T and DirecTV, which is on its heels right after it, equally massive, and there will be probably a couple of more. And it's maybe a natural outgrowth of the potential threat to those businesses that digital represents. And it also is a circling of the wagons to try to control and keep a consumer base that has kept most of these companies in the 60% margin world for 40 years. It's an incredibly lucrative business, But like all things, it's under threat, and everything can turn on a dime. And just the Netflix story itself of how quickly it's become a worldwide television platform with fantastic shows, huge penetration, a subscription base that's bigger than any other premium service in the world. That alone tells you that's just a few years. So that's why this consolidation is happening. I think it's forward thinking in terms of preserving a business. It's probably negative for consumers because less choice usually comes with higher pricing. We'll see if these are approved, but I think there's more to come.
Could be negative for the consumer, you say.
Yeah.
That leads to the question, well, that question hanging out there, is it in the public interest? One can see how it's in the business interest of the various entities to get bigger and bigger, eliminating, but is that in the public interest?
Probably not. Probably not. I don't think I mean, you'd be hard pressed to say why that would be good for the public. Fewer voices, fewer people in control. Presumably, undertaking a $50 billion acquisition means that you'll be passing on those costs for 50 years or more to recover, and the consumer will bear those costs. People look at their cable and satellite offerings often as kind of a utility, like the water and the gas and whatever else you might have. But at a certain point, the pricing becomes so painful that you start thinking, I could just have, a $10 internet connection and kind of go on YouTube and Hulu and maybe pay a little extra here for Netflix and maybe get something else, and I'm just fine. And so the cord cutting, I think, is real, and it will be a very, I think people are more savvy, they're more sophisticated, they go online, they read, they read about things like this. They're not just done for them. When you think about when the AT&T was broken up,
right.
I think most people kind of just said, well, I have a phone. If it says AT&T or Pacific Bell or New England Bell or whatever, I still have a phone. You're not getting rid of your phone, at least in that era. And but I think people now are going to make harder choices. There's more diversity, and they may not stick around and take the sticker shock.
But what about the federal regulators, whether you're in the United States or Canada and some other country? If someone at your peak of the business says, look, this may not be good for consumers, question, should we or should we not expect the government representing the people to step in and say, we're not going to allow this?
Well, it's complicated. We'll see. When the fox is watching the hen house, not much gets done. And in the U.S., certainly that's the case in the FCC. And so I think those are pretty cozy relationships. I don't expect much resistance there.
Now, forgive me if you must, but my life has been spent in news.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to, speaking of public service, if your view of the future is correct, and there's no reason to doubt it, I for one believe you on the money with it, where is the financial model that will support, say, deep digging investigative reporting, quality first-rate international reporting, both of which, as you know, are in decline at the moment? What happens to that in this big new digital future world?
Well, I think that the traditional model that you were part of and built so incredibly well with the 6 o'clock news on 2 or 3 broadcast offerings that people literally came home to watch before they started their night, that's in decline, and I think will continue to be so because people's habits will no longer revolve around being somewhere at a certain time to watch programming. And with those fantastic bureaus of old that had people all over the world, much like newspapers had people all over the world, are declining and declining. And I think it will wind up with hard-hitting kind of provocative journalism that is done and parlayed out in a few different shows here and there.
How is that going to be financed?
Well, let's take HBO, for example, that has Vice, which is kind of a mix between journalism and kind of provocative entertainment.
Right.
And and that show is very successful for them. They're financed by getting $10 or $15 a month from every subscriber that signs up to HBO. And in essence, you're paying for that offering along with many other shows as a portfolio of things. I think it will be harder and harder to find that in a ad-supported universe. Probably can't aggregate quite enough audience, and the topics that you want to take on, not so ad-friendly. Procter & Gamble probably not that interested in diving deep into the Bergdahl case, let's say. That gets tricky for them. That gets a little uncomfortable and somewhat political, and they just want to sell soap. So I think it will be hard pressed. It's going to have to be kind of visionary people that offer an entertainment aspect of the news, and I don't think you'll find it in reality programming. Even the docu-reality is more entertainment focused. I think documentaries will still provide incredibly deep diving things. HBO does a huge business of that, but Netflix is in that space, Showtime is in that space, a raft of Canadian networks are in that space, and I think that will thrive. But those are done, as you know, from anywhere from $50 to $500,000, depending on how you can piece it together and how many relatives you can hit up to help finance your film. So it's a model, but it isn't one that you can say, well, we do this, 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 and this. We get this percentage from foreign, this percentage from domestic, and we have a model. It's a guy saying, I'm going to do something about McDonald's, and $30,000 later, he has Supersize Me, which becomes one of the biggest hits of all time, or Michael Moore doing Roger and Me. Those voices, I think people will come for. But everything in between that is just kind of rehashing, kind of, the old news reading, that I don't think will have a place in the next wave of broadcast journalism or TV journalism.
I want to move to a broader question, but before doing so, if you find anyone who innovates an idea for a financial model to support deep digging investigative reporting in it, I'm available. Call me. Collect.
Okay. Fantastic. Will do.
But that YouTube and iTunes were game changers, no question about it. Big game changers. What is today's game changer?
Boy, I go back to, I know we've talked about it a lot, but I think the streaming subscription players are the game changers. YouTube is billions of hours of footage, like 100 minutes uploading every second, or hours, I can't remember the statistics. So the name of the game in the YouTube world and the multi-channel networks that are part of YouTube is branding and curation. And I think there will be a place in this universe where there's so many offerings for thought influencers to kind of share with you the things they like, because we don't have time to sort through those billions of hours, and you want to hear about something else. In the iTunes universe, that's just about absolute instant convenience. I'll pay $2 right now to get Scandal's episode from last night that I missed because I went to Banff, or whatever it might be. But I think the streaming players, Netflix, Hulu, Yahoo's getting into that business, Redbox is getting into that business, Walmart is in that business. There will be many others up here that are getting into that business. That is the current game changer. That will redefine the face of television, and you can't even really say television anymore, but filmed video content. That is changing everything. We're experiencing it. In 2 years, it will be completely different. Probably not anything like I predicted, but we'll all be talking about what happened and how did it happen in a couple of years.
Well, it's common to say, as platforms change, so the product must change. What kind of product change is necessary now? Have in mind, for example, are we likely to see more half-hour programs than hour programs as the model? Because the platforms are changing, so how does the product change?
Well, what's interesting about that, we've been doing this series, Orange is the New Black, and it's very interesting because people binge view, as you discussed. They watch a whole season quickly, and then they re-watch it. And the writing and the process of writing is informed by that potential of everybody being able to see it in a very quick order of time and going back. And actually, as on the studio side of that, as we watched the episodes as they were coming into us, long before they were made available on Netflix, they got better and better, and then we would go back because we knew something. The way the show is structured, there's a lot of flashbacks that tell you the individual stories about some of these prisoners and why they were there over time. And when you go back to episode 1, now that you know the stories of those prisoners, you look at episode 1 completely differently. So it really rewards you, and I think this is happening in many streaming shows, for multiple viewing. It's very sticky, as they say, and you have to think outside of the world of act breaks. You have to think about narrative that can be long-running, serialized stories that can play out over a long period of time, which is antithetical to the broadcast model, which is, it all has to play out in that 1 hour.
Right.
Usually there should be no connective tissue from last week's episode to this week's episode, because you don't want to infringe or assume that the viewer has a previous knowledge. So Law and Order would be the kind of classic procedural in which it's, long on story, short on character. Right. You don't really need to know anything about the investigators except that they're moving it along. You don't go home with them, and you play out that. And it's quite a great business from a financial model because it lasts forever in reruns all over the world. But the serialized storytelling is quite different, and it is much more novelistic. It's Dickensian, and it rewards you for staying with it and rereading like a great book. And that's what these really are. They're becoming novels. The mix of half hour and hour will really vary by platform. Netflix is focused on dramas, but they have also had Arrested Development and are developing half hours. But Arrested had a really big following. Hulu, where we're doing this thing called Deadbeat, has built their business entirely up to now on comedy. They're younger, they're kind of edgier and more subversive, and the viewers of Hulu are fans of shows that they rebroadcast from their broadcast partners like The Family Guy and Community. Right. So they're already in that rabbit hole of comedy. So it'll just be like networks now. People will probably establish their thing and go down that way.
Look at back to Lionsgate. You've had such success. Can you maintain it? If so, how? And where is the growth trajectory? Right. There would be people who say, listen, Lionsgate is great, but it's in the nature of such companies. They're at the peak and they have no place to go but down.
Well, fortunately for us, we're thinking we have a long way yet to go. And from its very modest beginnings, it has continued to grow. And the growth has been twofold. It kind of a twin strategy. Our founder, Frank Giustra, put the company together by cobbling together a number of Canadian creative assets, an animation company here, a studio facility in Vancouver, a film library from Montreal, and then turned his sights toward the U.S. to see if we could jump into the art house and niche film business, theatrical releasing business. That's right around when I joined the company with a mandate to try to get into the scripted series business. Specifically, they were doing nonfiction. They had an investment in a bigger TV entity that both did series and movies of the week. But the idea was maybe we can parlay our Canadian domicile and the ability to have tax credits and get a few shows off the ground. And TV, since then, over many, many, many years, has grown kind of organically one show at a time. On the feature side, 2 years into the venture, our current CEO, John Feldheimer, joined the company, recapitalized it at Frank's request, and focused on acquiring smaller other film companies and building the film business in blocks. Right. So we acquired Trimark Pictures, Artisan Pictures, Mandate Pictures, Summit Entertainment. Those are the 4 biggies that have led Lionsgate to be a very significant player in the feature film business, with top 5 in the box office the last few years. And with all the distribution and capabilities that all the majors have, an international business, a domestic business, a home entertainment business. We, on the TV side, have been beneficiaries of all those same verticals because our TV product flows either in parallel through those same ancillary markets. And so when one of our first big shows that really got off the ground was called The Dead Zone on USA Network. And it's from a book and a movie. A famous Canadian filmmaker made the movie, David Cronenberg, based on a Stephen King novel. And that we basically were kind of producing it for about as much money as we were getting, and it cost more than we were getting, so we were in a bit of a deficit hole for a while. And miraculously, it turned out that one of the companies we acquired had been representing all of the Stephen King home video product for years. All the ABC specials, The Stand, the Tommyknockers, you name it, they had them all. And all of a sudden, home video became a huge influx of revenue on this 2-hour pilot that we were just hoping to get away with making and not go out of business. And we suddenly had a stack of money on our side, and our partner Paramount had the international, and they had a stack of money on their side. So we did the famous prisoner swap, which is we gave them some of ours, and they gave them some of theirs, and it actually became a pretty good business. And over time, we've done that. When John came into the company, he's a TV guy. He was running all of Sony Television. Right. He eventually convinced Sandra to join. It took a couple years to convince her to come join this fledgling startup. But when she joined, then everything changed because we had a real business person that had done the biggest deals in the world with huge networks, and could also translate that into the cable deals we were doing. And then it's grown show by show by show by show. So we view ourselves as just starting, and because content is so in demand, we're really in a great place. And we've made it a habit, first by virtue of we had no money, and then by virtue of now we say that was a strategic plan to go to first movers and be their first hit show. That is kind of our goal. And when you do that, you're in business with someone who is so inextricably linked to your success through their success that they want to do more with you and they want to prop up that show. So if you think about Mad Men and AMC, really put AMC on the map. Yeah. It was part of their branding. It's been part of our branding and something that's catapulted us into the forefront of the television market. But we're still small relative to our competitors, so we're looking upward.
We're looking upward. Frankly, I hate to see Mad Men go.
Yeah, us too.
If I could talk you into doing another season, I would do so.
I'm going to give you Matt Weiner's number. If anybody could convince him, it would be you, because we have failed.
So. But you have Orange is the New Black. But give us a tip. A program is in development that you have in your gut. You say to yourself, "I think this is going to be a Mad Men or Orange is the New Black kind of hit." Yeah,
you don't know until you come out of that room with that creator, writer, showrunner, the creative team that's pitching you, and then there is magic, and you feel it, and everybody generally that's in the room on our side, leaves and starts proselytizing across the entire company, saying, I know it's really expensive, but wait, it's going to be great. And then the usual, yeah, but it's really expensive. And are you sure you can do it? And then we work for months, both on the creative and getting the pitch, and Chris and her team get it in shape and ready to go to the market, and simultaneously on the business model, because for us, it really has to be, kind of a break-even proposition going in on almost any show. Right. Before we can take it to the market based on the way Lionsgate works. And we've taken a few chances on things that aren't, and we've had good luck with Nashville, which is on the more expensive side and working for ABC. But that show really needs 5 or 6 seasons to ultimately pencil out. Our cable model and our streaming model is generally to find shows that have a great business model, the day we start shooting, that we're in the black, if you will. And that's a little harder to do. You have to make some painful decisions. You have to leave some things by the wayside because the economics just don't work at that particular network. But when we really love something, and that's just, I think, a testament to the Lionsgate culture, that person who stands on the table and waves his or her hands and says, I'm doing this thing, our CEO really responds to passion and ultimately says, okay, go for it. And some of the biggest franchises in Lionsgate history have come through that way. On the TV side, Weeds and Mad Men came in that way. On the movie side, Tyler Perry, who no one knew, came in that way. And a lot of horror franchises and big films, Oscar-winning movies like Precious and Crash, all were because 1 or 2 executives said this has to happen, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. So I think I'm glad our company, espouses that culture, but I think it's relevant for everybody.
Kevin, we're near the end here. We have only maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and you've been very generous with your time and your counsel here. What question have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
Well, I was thinking you might say it's a common question, but I think about it a lot when I'm awake at night because people ask the question, what keeps you up at night? And then I'm thinking about it when I'm up at night. And so I thought that might be on the menu. But in the event that you were going to ask that, I would say the biggest concern or the anxiety that I have in our current business in this landscape is a completely different one that when I began at Lionsgate. When I began at Lionsgate, the international TV market was considered, for scripted programming in any event, pretty much dead. That wasn't happening. It was all going to be reality only at the expense of scripted. My boss at the time at Lionsgate was very down on television, and I'd come into his office every morning and have his head in his hands, and he'd say, "This business is horrible. This is a terrible business. We've got to get into the internet. My friend just made $5 billion on Global Crossing. We have got to get out of this business." And I had come to Lionsgate. I couldn't believe that you actually could get paid to pitch people just ideas and stories, and actually your business travel expenses would be covered. So I kept saying, "What do you mean? This is the greatest business ever." I could just go to CBS and pitch, and they take my call, and who knows, I might sell something. So I eventually had to just stop listening to him because I was getting so depressed. So I would just say, "I'll be back. I will have sold something. We'll have lunch. It'll be fine. It'll be good." But it was a very dark time in the TV business, and there was a real vertical integration was happening, the consolidation, the first wave that you talked about. And there was a real sense that no independent could do anything, and that it was kind of over, and that we were in a bit of the dying embers of that business. And a couple of shows actually on ABC turned it around. Desperate Housewives and Lost in the same season that brought scripted back all over the world and reinvigorated the market in the US. And then cable really started to explode. So now, at the time, my worry was, will anybody buy anything? And there's only 3 or 4 buyers, and I'm stuck, and why would they listen to us? And we don't have the financing that everybody else has. But now we're running ragged trying to keep up with the amount of buyers. We cannot get enough pitches done in the day in Los Angeles or New York or wherever we are, driving back and forth to get our product out to the market. Our biggest concern is that we don't have enough time in the day to sell all the product that we have. Right. And no matter how many emails or phone calls you make, there's nothing, as you know, like an in-person discussion to put a pitch over. And so it's a happy anxiety, but I'm still awake.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Beggs. Kevin, thank you so very much.